And we're in A2U5L5, and we're going to solve polynomials by factoring now. And this is probably going to be a review for a lot of you, but there are some concepts embedded in these problems that will be a good spiral. It may be things that you haven't seen for quite a while. So number one, we have x to the third plus x, and we're going to solve by factoring. So that means the first thing we have to do is factor. Now when you factor, you look for a greatest common factor. So we're going to take x out, and that's going to leave us x squared plus 1. Okay? Now remember, you cannot factor a sum of two squares. You can factor a sum of cubes, you can factor a difference of two squares, but you do not have a method to factor a sum of two squares. So we're going to take each factor and set it equal to 0. Just like this, and then we're going to solve. Now this one is solved, but this one, how do you solve it? Subtract 1 from each side. Now you have x squared is equal to -1. Take the square root of each side. So you get x is equal to, okay? What is the square root of -1? Remember your patterns of I? So the square root of -1 is going to be plus or minus I. So your answers here, this polynomial is going to hit zeros at x equals 0 and x equals plus or minus I. Okay, for number 2, we have 4x to the third minus 7x squared equals 3x squared. So first we've got to get it in standard form. That means I need a 0 right here. So I'm going to subtract 3x squared from here. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Okay. Now, 4x to the third comes down. -7x squared minus 3x squared gives you minus 10x to the second equals 0. All right, we're ready to factor. Greatest common factor here is going to be 2x to the second. When I factor it out of here, I'm going to have 2x. When I factor it out of here, I'll get minus 5. Now you take each factor and set it equal to 0. If 2x squared is equal to 0 and 2x minus 5 is equal to 0, here, divide both sides by 2 if you have to. Take the square root of each side, and x is going to be 0, which you could have determined right there. Now over here, you're going to add 5 to each side, just solving. 2x is equal to 5, divide by 2. So x is equal to 5/2. So this polynomial is going to cross the x-axis at x is equal to 0 and 5/2. Okay, for number 3, we have x to the fourth minus 64 is equal to 0. It's already in standard form, so we're ready to factor. Going through our chart, we have no greatest common factor, but I do have a difference of two perfect squares. So we can factor this into the square root of the first plus the square root of the last times the square root of the first minus the square root of the last equals 0. Now we're going to take each thing and set it equal to 0 and solve it down. So let's see what we get. When we subtract 8 from each side here, I have x squared is equal to -8, and I'm going to take the square root of each side, so I have x. Okay, now to simplify the square root of -8, this is going to be -1 times 4 times 2. That's how you'd break it down. Now when you take the square root, you're going to need your plus or minus. The square root of -1 is I, so that takes care of that. The square root of 4 is 2. Now the other 2 will have to stay under the radical sign, so the answer to this half is plus or minus 2i onto the square root of 2. All right, let's tackle this one. I'm going to add 8 to each side. So now I have x squared is equal to positive 8. Also going to take the square root of each side. Now when I do, it's going to be plus or minus over here as well. All right, this time I don't have a negative to worry about, but what's a perfect square that will go into 8? 4 with 2 left over. So I take the square root of 4 out. When I take the square root, it becomes 2. This 2 is left under the radical. So my total answers are actually this one plus or minus 2I onto the square root of 2 and plus or minus 2 onto the square root of 2. Okay, let's look at number 4. 5x to the 5th minus 80x is equal to 0. Greatest common factor right off the bat is going to be 5x. So when I factor 5x out of here, this is going to leave me x to the 4th minus 16. Okay, now x to the 4th minus 16 will factor, I don't want to lose my 5x, into, this is the difference of two squares, x squared plus 4, x squared minus 4. And we can keep going because this is still a difference of two squares. Now this is a sum of two squares and we don't have a factoring chart for it or a factoring method. So now I have 5x, I have x squared plus 4. This will factor into x plus 2, x minus 2. Okay? So let's get them all solved. First I'm going to do 5x equals 0, so x is 0. Now when I solve this one, x squared plus 4 is equal to 0. Subtract 4 from each side. So x squared is negative 4. When you take the square root of each side, you're going to get x equals plus or minus. All right, the square root of 4 is 2, and since it's negative, it's going to be 2i. The square root of any negative number, you pull out the I. Okay? Now I have x plus 2 equals 0 and x minus 2 equals 0. So I would subtract 2 from each side. X equals negative 2. And over here I'm going to add 2 to each side. So x is equal to positive 2. So let's see what all our answers are. We have a 0. We have a plus or minus 2i. And here we have a positive and a negative 2. So you could put each one, or you can also combine them to be positive or negative 2 as well. And look at that. See, this is actually two answers, the positive and the negative. This is actually two answers, the positive and the negative. This is one answer. So we have 5 total possibilities. And what do you notice about that exponent? Remember what we learned in the section before? Okay, for number 5, we have x to the 3rd plus 125 is equal to 0. It's already in standard form. So we just need to factor. And I notice right off the bat, I have a sum of cubes. Now, if you don't remember your sum of cubes formula, you need to look that up real quick. But factoring this with the sum of cubes formula is going to give me the cube root of this plus the cube root of that. And then if you'll remember, we took this and we squared it. And then we multiplied those two together. And then we squared the last term. And let's see, I think I got my signs wrong. It's same, opposite. This is supposed to be a minus sign, so correct that. Okay? Now, to do this, we split it because we know both of these have to be equal to 0. That's what we're solving for. So when you solve this, subtract 5 from each side, you get x is equal to negative 5. So there's answer number 1. Now, this one proves to be a little bit more of a problem because you cannot factor it. All right. What we're going to have to do to solve it, it can be solved, it just can't be factored. So we're going to go with the quadratic formula. Now, if you have forgotten the quadratic formula, it is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, what are all those a, b's, and c's? Well, they come from here. The coefficient of this is your a, this is b, and this is c. Okay, so when we plug this in to the quadratic formula, it is going to look like negative, all right, b is negative 5 plus or minus the square root of, all right, b squared is negative 5 squared minus 4 times a, which was 1, times c, which is 25, all over 2a. Okay, Okay, now I did no simplifying, I just plugged everything in. So now let's go clean this up some. Negative of negative 5 is positive 5. I have plus or minus. All right, now under my radical, negative 5 squared is 25 minus 4 times 1 times 25 is 100. All over 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, let's go again. So now we have 5 plus or minus. All right, under this radical, 25 minus 100, and let me just, okay, that's going to be negative 75. So how could I split that up? What is a perfect square? Well, 25, so I can split this up into negative 25 times 3, all over 2, and more work, plus or minus. Now, what's the square root of negative 25? Since it's a negative, you're going to pull out the I, and what's the square root of 25? 5. So you're going to have 5i. All right, your 3 has to stay under there, and it's over 2. Now, see, that was not so bad. All right, now here are both of your answers. You have x equals negative 5. That's the first one. And all of this is your second one. 5 plus or minus 5i square root of 3 over 2. Okay, here's number 6. 8x to the 5th plus 5x squared is equal to 4x squared. So first let's get it in standard form. We're going to subtract 4x squared from each side, and that is going to give us 8x to the 5th plus x squared equals 0. All right, now we're ready to factor. So first we're going to take the greatest common factor out. Now the greatest common factor, they both have an x, and you want to take the smallest exponent that you have in your problem. So that's x squared. Now when I factor it out of here, I'm going to have 8x to the 3rd plus 1 equals 0. Okay, so we can take this factor and go ahead and set it equal to 0, and if you want to square root each side and go ahead and find your answer. So there's answer number 1. Now what we need to do is deal with this, and this one's going to be intense. All right, I have a sum of 2 cubes. So you're thinking of your sum of 2 cubes formula, and that was you take the cube root of this, which is 2x, and you have the same sign, which is plus, and the cube root of that, which is 1. Now in your other factor, you would square this, so that's going to be 4x squared. You have the opposite sign, so that's minus. You multiply these two things together, 2x, and then it's the always positive and the square of that, which is 1. All right? So now we can whittle this on down. I can take 2x plus 1 equals 0 and subtract 1 from each side and then divide by 2, and that's going to give me negative 1/2. So there's answer number 2. Now I have to find the answer to this, and once again you cannot factor this trinomial, so we're going to have to grab our quadratic formula. So here is A, here is B, and here is C, and let's go up right under this and solve it. So I have x is equal to, all right, negative b is going to be negative of negative 2, plus or minus the square root of. All right, b was negative 2, so I've got negative 2 squared minus 4 times my a is 4 times my c, which is 1, all over 2a. And let me see if I can move over some so we don't get our work confused here. Okay? And now. Okay, so let's clean it up. I have x equals negative of negative is positive 2, plus or minus. All right, underneath the square root. Negative 2 squared is 4. And 4 times 4 is 16, times 1 is 16, so now I have 4 minus 16 all over, and this a, I didn't fill that in. The a was 4, so on the bottom I have 2 times 4, which is 8. And we are still cleaning up. What is 4 minus 16? That's negative 12. So now I need to find the square root of negative 12. And what I want to do, what's a perfect square that'll go into 12? 4. And I need a negative of it. So that's going to be negative 4 times 3 left under there, all over 8. So I'm going to have 2 plus or minus. All right, when I pull the square root of negative 4 out, that's 2i square root of 3 all over 8. Now I do need to reduce down by that 8, and I have to do it with all 3 of those at one time. So 2 will go into all of them. This is going to be 1. Since this is 1, I don't really have to have it, and when I divide 8 by 2, I get 4. So now my cleaned up answer is 1 plus or minus I square root of 3 over 4. Okay, so I have 4 answers since that's plus or minus. 0, negative 1/2, and 1 plus or minus I square root of 3 over 4. Okay, let's look at number 7. We have x cubed minus 216 is equal to 0. So we are in standard form, and I do see a difference of 2 cubes. So let's go ahead and get that factored. And that's going to factor into the root of the first, same sign, and the root of 216 is 6. All right, then the rest of it is going to be our first term squared. Our signs are the same, the opposite. Then for the middle term, we're going to multiply these two, always positive, square of the last equals 0. Okay, the first factor, let's go ahead and knock that out because that's an easy one. If x minus 6 is equal to 0, then x is equal to 6. So that's your first answer. Okay, then we look at this one and it won't factor again, so we're going to be forced to use the quadratic formula. So let's plug all that in. In fact, let me come over here so I can look at my formula while I plug in. And here is A, here is B, and here is C. So B is 6. I'm going to have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of. All right, B squared, 6 squared is going to be 36 minus 4 times A times C. Well, that's going to be 4 times, all right, A is 1 and C is 36. And this is all going to be over 2 times A, which is 1. Okay, so let's come over here and clean up some. It's going to be negative 6 plus or minus. All right, 4 times 36 is 144. And 36 minus 144 is going to give me negative 108. All over 2. Okay, now what's a perfect square that will go into 108? 36 will. So we're going to rewrite that as negative 36 times 3. All over 2. We just have to be careful. All right, negative 6 plus or minus. Now when I pull the square root of that negative 36 out, that's going to be 6i. And then I have the 3 left, all over 2. Okay, now we're ready to cancel. 2 will go into both of those 6's, and what's that going to leave me? Well, 2 goes into this, that's going to be negative 3. 2 goes into this, that's going to be plus or minus 3i square root of 3. And that's your final answer. So we have 2. We have the 6, and we have negative 3 plus or minus 3i square root of 3. Okay, let's look at number 8. Now we do need standard form, so let's subtract 54 from each side. So that's going to give us 6x cubed minus 54 is equal to 0. Now before we factor, if there's a greatest common factor, we need to pull that out. And 2 will go into both of these. So I'm going to divide 2. That'll give me 8x to the third minus 27 is 0. Okay, now 2, since it doesn't have a variable onto it, it can never be equal to 0. So we really don't need to consider it right now. We're going to focus on just the variable part. And what I have here is the difference of 2 cubes. So we're going to factor that into the cube root of this plus minus the cube root of that, which is 3. And then we're going to square this so that it's 4x squared. We had same, opposite. We multiply these two together, get 6x, always positive 9. Okay? So this one, we can go ahead and figure out where that 0 is. We would add 3 to each side. So 2x is equal to 3. Divide both sides by 2. So we have x is equal to 3/2 is one of our zeros. All right. Now, when we look at this one, it will not factor either. So we're going to have to go with our quadratic formula. All right. Here's A, here's B, and here's C. So let's start plugging in. I want negative B. So that is negative 6 plus or minus the square root of. All right, b squared, 6 squared, let's just go ahead and put 36 minus 4 times a times c. That's going to be 4 times 4 times 9. And this is all over 2 times a. My a is 4, so that's 8. All right, so now we've got negative 6 plus or minus. All right, 4 times 4 is 16, times 9 is 144. So I'm going to have 36 minus 144 over 8. And then negative 6 plus or minus. 36 minus 144 is negative 108. All over 8. All right, factoring down. A perfect square that will go into negative 108 is negative 36 times 3 over 8. Okay, so now what is the square root of negative 36? That's going to be 6i. You've got the square root of 3 left, and this is all over 8. Now, you can divide 2 into the 6's and the 8, so we can reduce down all of those. Now when I divide negative 6 by 2, that's going to give me negative 3 plus or minus 3i square root of 3. And when I divide 8 by 2, I get 4. So that's going to be your other answer. So you have 3/2. And then you have negative 3 plus or minus 3i square root of 3 over 4. Okay, let's have a look at number 9 here. X to the 4th plus x squared minus 42. And I happen to see that we're going to be able to factor this one. How do I know that? Well, I look at 42, it's negative. I look at the coefficient of this, it's 1. And right off the bat, I know my factors of 42. Which if I multiply negative 7 or positive 7 times negative 6, that gives me negative 42, and it adds up to give me the coefficient of that. So we're just going to unfold. All right, so this is going to be x squared. You're taking the square root of the first term. Then you find, like I said, one of each. All right, since this is positive, it's going to be positive 7, negative 6. All right, I look at both of these, nothing will factor. So we're just ready to set each one equal to 0 and solve. If I subtract 7 from each side, I have x squared is equal to negative 7. Now I'm going to take the square root of each side. So this is going to give me x is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 7. Now you cannot leave a negative under your radical. That's not lowest terms. So what we're going to do, how do you take the negative out? Well, you're actually doing negative 1 times 7. The square root of negative 1 is I. So it was just a manipulation technique, but this is your first answer. Now if I take x squared minus 6 equals 0, and I add 6 to each side, and I take the square root of each side, this will be x is equal to plus or minus square root of 6. There's no negative under there, so there's no need to simplify, and there's no perfect square in 6, so it won't break down. Okay, and that's all. Okay, number 10, we have x to the 4th plus 3 equals 13 minus 9x to the 4th. So let's get it in standard form first. I'm going to add 9x to the 4th to each side, and then I'm going to subtract 13 from each side. So that is going to get me a 0 over here, and let's see what this does. X to the 4th plus 9x to the 4th is 10x to the 4th, and 3 minus 13 is minus 10. Okay, so now I'm ready to factor. I see a greatest common factor first of all of 10. So let me take 10 out of here, and that's going to get me x to the 4th minus 1 equals 0. Now as far as finding my zeros go, since there's no variable attached to that 10, I don't really need to consider it right now. You know, you don't want to just say I'm forgetting it, but there's no way a 10 is going to be 0, so it's just not going to give me an answer. All right, x to the 4th minus 1. Get ready to factor. That is a difference of 2 squares, first of all. So I can start off with x squared plus 1 and x squared minus 1. Now, x squared plus 1, we know, can't factor. It's a sum of 2 squares, and we do not have a technique for that. So what we're going to do is just say x squared plus 1 is 0, subtract 1 from each side. So now I have x squared equals negative 1. I'm going to take the square root of each side. So I have x equals plus or minus. Now what is the square root of negative 1? Think of your patterns of I. Negative 1 just is I. So your first answer is positive, is plus or minus I. All right. Now let's look at x squared minus 1, and I'm going to come over here for this one because first off it will factor. It's a difference of 2 squares, so I can do x plus 1, x minus 1. Alright, now x plus 1 equals 0. I would subtract 1 from each side, so x is negative 1. And over here, if I do x minus 1 equals 0, add 1 to each side, I get x is equal to positive 1. So my two answers are x equals, all right, over here I had the plus or minus I, and over here I have positive negative 1. You can write them as two separate numbers, or you can combine them with the positive, the plus minus sign. So that's the answer to number 10. Okay, let's look at number 11. X to the 3rd minus 8x squared plus 16x is 0. We're in standard form. Let's take out the greatest common factor of x. So this is going to be x times x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 0. Okay, and we can go ahead and knock this one out. We know one of our answers is going to be x is equal to 0. All right, now this is a trinomial. Will it factor? Well, can you think of two numbers that would multiply to give you 16 and add up to give you 8? And yes, 4 will. Since this is plus, your signs are going to be the same, and they're going to be whatever this is. So I've got x minus, 4, and 4. Now, do you have to solve them both? Well, no, not really. You know you're going to get 2 of them, so x is equal to 4. And when you write your answer, you don't put 2 4s, okay? It's only 1 4. If you have the same answer or the same number twice, you just put it in your set one time. Okay, on number 12, we look at our polynomial, and we see that we do have a greatest common factor. I see 2 will go into all the numbers, and then I look, all the terms have an x, and I want to take the smallest exponent of x that is in my problem, and that's going to be x to the 2nd, all right? So when I divide all that out, this is going to leave me x to the 4th minus, all right, it's going to leave me 5x squared here, and then it's going to leave me minus 24 here, okay? So 2x squared, if I want to go ahead and knock that out, if that's equal to 0, then x is 0, and that's my first one. Okay, now for this, can you think of two numbers that you could multiply to get 24 and add up to get 5? Well, since it's negative, it's going to be one of each, and I'm thinking negative 8 times 3 would do the trick. So let's factor it. X squared and x squared, since this is a minus, you've got one of each sign. My 8 is going to be the negative one, and my 3 is going to be positive, okay? And that's all the factoring I can do. 8 is not a perfect square, so you can't use the difference of two squares there. And you can't do anything there. All right, so when we do x squared plus 3 equals 0, subtract 3 from each side. So now I have x squared is negative 3. We're going to take the square root of each side. So I'm going to have x is equal to plus or minus square root of negative 3. And by now we're pretty used to this. So x is equal to plus or minus. What do you do when you have a negative under your radical? You pull out the imaginary I, and 3 will have to stay under there. So that's my second one. All right, now let's look at this one. I've got x squared minus 8 equals 0. So I'm going to add 8 to each side. So I have x squared is equal to 8. Take the square root of each side. So you get x squared is equal to plus or minus. All right, let's go ahead and simplify this. What's a perfect square that will go into 8? I'll write it over here. 4 times 2, right? So when you pull the square root of 4 out, that becomes a 2, and you have the 2 left under here. So our final answer on this one is going to be that x is equal to 0, and x is equal to plus or minus I onto the square root of 3, and x, that's not x squared, that's just x. X is equal to plus or minus 2 square root of 2. Okay, for number 13, here's our problem. So the first thing we want to do is get it in standard form. So let's subtract 8 from each side, and this is going to give me 3x to the 4th plus 2x squared minus 8 equals 0. Okay, now this one will factor with the AC method. You could go ahead and use the quadratic formula, but let's just use AC method. It'll be a good review for that. So what do you do on the AC method? Well, the first thing you do is multiply A times C. So 3 times negative 8 is negative 24. Now I'm looking for a pair of numbers that will multiply to give me negative 24, but add up to give me positive 2. So that's going to be negative 4, positive 6. Okay? Now remember, with the AC method, what you do on your next step is you split the middle. Remember? So we're going to split this, and now we're going to write 3x to the 4th. It's going to be minus 4x squared. Whatever this is, that's what your split needs. And then plus 6x squared minus 8 is 0. Okay? Now the greatest common factor between these two is just going to be x to the 2nd. So that's going to give me 3x squared minus 4. And then my greatest common factor here is going to be 2. So that's going to give me 3x squared minus 4. Now remember, once these match, you pull them out. That becomes one factor. So I have 3x to the 2nd minus 4 times these two that were left over. X squared plus 2. Okay, so I look at each one and neither one will factor. So let me come over here where I have more room. We're going to solve each one for 0. So let's first take 3x squared minus 4 and set it equal to 0, and we're going to solve it down. So I'm going to add 4 to each side. So that's going to give me 3x squared is equal to 4. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So I have x squared is equal to 4/3. Now I'm going to take the square root of it. Okay, so that's going to be x is equal to plus or minus. All right, let's look at what we got. This 4, you can take the square root of 4, and that's just 2. But now I have a radical in my denominator. What do you do when you have a radical in your denominator? You rationalize it. So we're going to multiply by square root of 3 over square root of 3. And our first answer is going to be x plus or minus 2 square root of 3 over square root of 3 times itself is 3. Okay, so there's the first one. Now I'm going to take x squared plus 2, set it equal to 0, and solve that. So I'm going to subtract 2 from each side. X squared is equal to negative 2. I'm going to take the square root of each side. So now I have x equals, all right, plus or minus. What do you do when you have a negative under the radical? Pull the I out, square root of 2. All right, so our final answer on this one is going to be x equals plus or minus 2 square root of 3 over 3 and plus or minus I square root of 2. Okay, for number 14, first thing we need to do is get it in standard form. So I am going to subtract 2x from each side, and I'm going to subtract 18 from each side. And over here, that's going to get me 0. So let's see what it gives me here. 5x to the third minus 3x to the second. 32x minus 2x is positive 30x. And then I've got the minus 18. Okay, ready to factor? I have a 4-term polynomial here. So the only way to factor that, there's no greatest common factor, but I'm going to factor by grouping. All right, so when I look at my first one, what is my greatest common factor here? It's just going to be x squared. All right, when I factor x squared out of that, I'm going to get 5x minus 3 left over. Okay, so what's my greatest common factor between these two? 6. So when I factor 6 out, I'm going to get 5x minus 3. Okay, so now these two come out and they become 1. And then I take the x squared plus 6. That becomes the other factor. Okay, so now I'm going to take each one of these and solve it for 0. So let's take the 5x minus 3 equals 0. You would add 3 to each side. So now you have 5x is equal to 3. Divide by 5. So x is equal to 3/5. So there's one answer. All right, let's come over here to do the x squared plus 6. X squared plus 6 is equal to 0. I'm going to subtract 6 from each side. So now I have x squared is equal to negative 6. I'm going to take the square root of each side. The square root of x squared is x. Since I took the square root, I need plus or minus. Now, what is the square root of negative 6? You know that negative has to come out as I, and there is no perfect square factor of 6, so that's going to be it. So our final answer is going to be x is equal to 3/5 and plus or minus I square root of 6. Okay, here's number 15. So we've got x to the third plus 2x squared plus 5x plus 10. We have 4 terms. There's no greatest common factor, so let's factor by grouping. When I group the first two and the last two. All right, the greatest common factor between the first two is x squared. So when I factor that out, I'm going to have x plus 2. All right, over here my greatest common factor is 5, so I'm going to have x plus 2. Now I pull the x plus 2's out. They become a factor, and I have x squared plus 5. So now I'm ready to solve both of them. That won't factor because it's not a difference of squares. All right, x plus 2 equals 0. I'm going to subtract 2 from each side, and I get x equals negative 2. That's the first answer. Now when I do x squared plus 5, First, I'm going to subtract 5 from each side. So I've got x squared is equal to negative 5. Now let's take the square root of each side. So I have x equals, all right, this is going to be plus or minus because I took a square root. Now what do you do when you have a negative under your radical? That's going to become an I. The 5 becomes positive, but it has to stay under there. So what we're going to have for an answer here is negative 2 and plus or minus I square root of 5. Okay, let's see number 16. 2x to the third minus 3x squared minus 32x plus 48. No greatest common factor. So we have 4 terms. We're going to need to factor by grouping. All right, the greatest common factor between these two is just going to be the x squared. So when I factor that out, I get 2x minus 3. All right, now over here, my greatest common factor is going to be 16. And when I factor that out, I'm going to have 2x. Now, since you're factoring out a minus, it changes this sign to minus. Okay, now my 2x minus 3's, I'm going to factor them out and make them one term times whatever was left over. X squared minus 16 equals 0. Okay, we're ready to solve. So let's do 2x minus 3 equals 0. We're going to add 3 to each side. So now I have 2x is equal to 3. Divide by 2. So x is 3/2. First answer. Now when I do x squared minus 16, I'm going to add 16 to each side. So I have x squared is equal to 16. Take the square root of each side. So I have x is equal to plus or minus, the square root of 16 is 4. So our final answer is going to be x equals 3/2. Actually, this goes on the other side. And plus or minus 4. Okay. Good to go.